Okay, so we're going to talk about wall types really quickly. In a nutshell, this is a bigger conversation, but I'm going to try to keep it relatively simple and kind of straightforward for this particular class. In general, depending on which office you go to, Revit has the ability to actually model the actual thickness of the wall, whether it's made up of 2x4, 2x6, and it has a stucco on the outside, drywall on the inside, or tile on the inside. You could actually create what we call a wall assembly. But for typical homes and residential projects, oftentimes that is just way too much information, and we still somewhat draw kind of a hybrid style of kind of legacy, the way how we used to draft, but using the new technology like Revit. So I just want you to know Revit has an ability, and it is recommended to actually use the actual wall thickness and the wall assembly of a project. But for the most part, again, 80% of the residential projects, at least that we do in our house, we use what we call a generic wall. So back before Revit, when people were hand drafting or using AutoCAD, they would make the walls about 6 inches thick in scale, knowing that that wasn't the actual thickness of the walls. But when you print it on a piece of paper, you really can't tell how thick it is, and it's just accepted as industry standard at 6 inches. Well, to make it complicated, even more complicated, in our office, we use a wall called generic 5 inches. It just visually looks a little bit more comfortable for me, and that's what we generally use unless we have to use a wall that is the actual assembly. At that point, we will custom make our walls, and that would be another Revit class of creating custom wall families. The reason for this long-winded introduction is I really wanted to talk about these Revit vocabulary, the concept of wall centerline, core centerline, finished face exterior, finished face interior, core face exterior, and core face interior. Like, what the heck does that all mean? Before I start creating a wall, actually, let me draw some reference planes just so that you guys can see. So I'm just drawing some guidelines here, and I want to show you what the difference is between all those little Revit terminology. So when I create a wall, and I have a basic wall, so basically it's just what I'm going to call a dumb 5-inch thick wall, right? And if I use a wall center line, when I click somewhere on the screen, it'll create that wall using the center of that wall. All right, so that is called wall center line, the whole wall center line. Now if I go back to my wall tool, and then I use core center line and wall center line is the same thing. I think, give me a second, I'll describe that later. But I'm going to go to core face exterior. And if I click on that line, it'll give me one side. So that the side that's touching my dash line, that's the exterior line. Right? And another thing that clues you into whether it's the outside or the inside of that wall that we just drew is you'll see this little arrow symbol. That represents that's the exterior. And then now let me create another wall using core face interior, and I'm going to click on the same side, but you'll see now it's drawing on the opposite side of the wall by default, and then my exterior is on this side, opposite side of where I clicked. So that's kind of the big difference between core face center line, core face exterior, core face interior. And then one more trick, like if I generally just pick by default, because frankly it really doesn't matter, at least at this level, whether you pick core face exterior or interior. But let's say you started exterior like this, and you're like, oh, I want the wall to be on the other side of the line. You just hit your space bar and it'll flip it. Okay, so that's exterior, interior type of flip situation. So that's how you do it. And then let me kind of now go through just as an added bonus, and hopefully I don't confuse you guys. Let me see if we have it loaded. I'm gonna take one of these These are, it comes with Revit out of the box. It is an interior 6 1/8 inch thick partition wall. So if I use that, then all of these options will be applicable. So let me go to wall center line. So you can see that the wall, same thing, it looks the same. Actually, I'm going to bring these things closer so I can zoom in here. And I'm also going to turn on my view from coarse to fine. So you can see this wall has many layers. So these two inside layers right here, which I'm going to try to draw right here. Oops. Basically right here and right here. That's considered your core face. And then this is your your plywood and your structural. And this will be considered your finish. And that would be considered also your finish, interior finish. So, all right. So that was wall center line. That's what we used. So I'm going to go back to the wall. And now I'm going to choose core center line. Core center line and wall center line, frankly, should be the same. Right? Hopefully that makes sense to you guys. Because the center line of a wall is the center line of a wall. And so that part shouldn't really matter. Let me go back to the wall again. And then when you pick finish face exterior, when I click on this line, you can see it's taking my very finished layer of my wall and using that as a reference to stick my wall to. So that's finish face exterior. And then if I take core face exterior and I click on the line and I go like that, and I surely hope that I'm not confusing you guys, but now my reference line where I was clicking from is placing my wall at my core on the finish side. All right. So then let me go back to wall, and I'm gonna go finish face interior. It's the same thing. You should be able to see it'll snap from the very outside of the interior face finish. And then I'm going to go core face interior, which will snap it to this line. I don't think I need to draw it at this point. So hopefully I did not confuse you, but I hope you understand the concept of the core and the exterior face and the interior face, because it will be important as you continue to use Revit. In this particular class, we are not going to use a assembled wall like this. We're simply going to use a generic wall. Generic 5 inches, and my recommendation is to just simply have it at core face exterior and not use the center line, because it's better to kind of trace the outside of your line than to try to kind of figure out where the center line is. Okay, so let's do one more concept before I end this demo. The concept of what we call base and top constraint. So remember, we have levels, right? So we have multiple levels here. Let me go back, make that a 1/4 inch. You guys should know how to do that by now. Drop this down. All right, so we have a level from finished floor to finished ceiling. So what's going to happen here, I'm going to give you two views here. This is my elevation level, and then this is my floor plan. So when you create a wall, you definitely want to give it more additional information. So here's my wall. Revit's telling me, okay, you can start making your wall. It's gonna go from the core face exterior. My base constraint, meaning where is the bottom of my wall? So you can see that little preview that shows up. So I said I want my bottom of my wall to be at first level finished floor. And then if you look at the top constraint, it's asking me, where do you want the top of the wall to be? Well, since I'm drawing the first floor plan, I want the top of the wall to be at the first floor finished ceiling. So now if I start creating my walls, you can see on the screen to my left that it's automatically starting from my finished floor, and the wall stops at my finished ceiling because that was my top constraint. Constraint meaning hold it at that level, and the bottom constraint was at finished floor. So let me create another set of walls next to it. Now I'm going to say you know what, I want you to start at the first floor, but my top constraint, I want you to go all the way up to the second floor finished ceiling. And I'm going to create another wall next to it. I'm looking at the wrong elevation, so this is probably confusing you. Let me go to the south elevation. I opened up my view to the south elevation so that it kind of looks like the way you're looking. So this is the wall that I created first. And remember, my top constraint was only up to the first floor finished ceiling. And then when I created these set of walls, I said my top constraint should be second floor finished ceiling, right? So let me go here. Let me also adjust that 1/4 inch. So you can see how important the levels are, because all the Revit elements that you create has to be attached to some sort of a floor or a ceiling, right? For a building. So having these levels is super important. And what's also really unique or very convenient is, let's say you wanted these things to be only at the first floor. Well, you can simply select the walls and you can just say, hey, my top constraint, bring that wall to the first finished ceiling, and it'll do it. If it was done in traditional CAD, you'd have to stretch it, trim it, bring the lines down, and it's a lot of work. But in Revit, you just tell it where you want it to be, and it's pretty magical. So anyhow, hopefully this demo was informative. We spoke about basically wall types, the concept of all the wall terminology, whether it's a core or exterior face, interior face, and base constraint in creating the walls. So this should be enough for you guys as a intro, and let's get on to creating our floor plan next.